Let's go.
Let's go.
Oh, do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Let's say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have razor juice.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where at least one of us is very cold and snowy and not terribly pleased about that because she wants it to be spring. I am Lauren Humphreys Brooks, and with me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen.
Hello, it's 53 and clear here, so
I hate
sorry.
you.
Well, you're welcome to come out here anytime you want.
I dream of 53. See,
we have a guest room.
I'm telling you, this is when every other time of the year, I'm like, I don't want to move to LA. Like, keep moving to California, leaving New York to go to LA. And then it gets to be like February, and I'm just like, I could live in California. I think I would be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see? I'd take you to all the fun spots.
Yeah, totally. Like, I know people in California, actually.
You do. Come on out anytime. Like I said, we have a guest room.
I do want to come to visit at some point. I don't think I'm going to be moving to California anytime soon, but I do actually want to go to California.
You can just winter here.
Because 53 is like, oh my God, that's so warm. I could walk around in like a t-shirt. So exciting. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. Even like for me where it's like, oh, that just sounds cold. But when you're out in the sun, 53 when it's sunny is actually, yeah, it's very pleasant even when you're used to it being 70 or 80.
Yes, I'm looking forward to when it's like 53 in New York and I can open my balcony door and be like, everybody outside.
Yep.
Anyways, so yes, that's the weather report. It's cold. How are you doing, Karen?
I'm doing okay. I don't know, it's been kind of a weird week. It's been one of those weeks where I just kind of feel out of sorts, but I've been trying to just like be on top of stuff. So I feel like I accomplished some good things, but I also just want to nap. I just want to like crawl in bed, throw the covers over my head and just sleep all day.
I understand that. I mean, I feel like that's what February tends to be, at least. I always get a little bit like, don't make me do anything. Like, not even like fun things, just nothing. I'm just gonna sit here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we have things that we want to talk about today. Some interesting things, at least two kind of somewhat disparate topics, which we tend to do on this podcast. But to start out with, we wanted to talk about this issue of celebrity biopics and not just celebrity biopics, but media involving like celebrity scandals, court cases, trials, things like that, and the issue of consent. Because Hulu recently released a limited series called Pam and Tommy, which is about the relationship between Pam Anderson and Tommy Lee, and specifically about the release of their sex tape. Back in, when was that? 90s
95.
95.
95, 96.
And see, I was young at that point, but I do actually remember this because this was like these very early days of the internet. This was very like kind of the beginning of some of the celebrity sex tape things. And the big issue, of course, was that this was not a tape that they made and then released themselves. This was a tape that was stolen from them. From their house, and was kind of disseminated online, and was disseminated by a porn producer, and turned into this whole like kind of celebrity circus where Pam Anderson was being asked about it on the Tonight Show. There were all of these conversations that kind of got going around this celebrity couple who had this whirlwind romance wedding, and everyone was seeing them have sex. And this was in the context, this was a honeymoon tape, right? So this was in the context of like, it was a section of the tape that was actually stolen from them, but it was of course the one that everyone focused on. And the issue, I think, in the back of this television show is the fact that Pam Anderson did not give her consent for the show to be made. In fact, she didn't have to give her consent because the show itself is based on a Rolling Stone article about the theft of the tape and how it got disseminated. So essentially, they kind of, by optioning the rights to this article, they sort of circumvented the need to get her, or for that matter, Tommy Lee's consent. But Tommy Lee has kind of been like, yeah, whatever, I don't care, it's cool, fine. Pam Anderson has been completely silent about this. This is not something that she agreed to at any level. Even though, according to the producers, according to the writers, according to Lily James, who plays her in the show, they tried to get in touch with her, they tried to talk to her, and she did not respond. But they went ahead and made the show anyways. So it's a weird issue because you have this show that is about the violation of a woman's consent at the end of the day, right? And they made it without the consent of the person that they're depicting. So, Karen, I want you to start off. Like, what are your thoughts about this? I have very intense feelings about this, but you've actually gotten to watch a bit of the show. I have not yet, and I don't know if I'm actually going to because it just feels very icky to me.
Yeah, and honestly, I've basically watched the first episode, and I probably will stop there. I don't care if it gets better, because it just, the way that it starts off just feels so gross to me. But because ultimately, yeah, they're billing this as a Pam and Tommy story. That's literally what it's called, Pam and Tommy. Pam doesn't have a line of dialogue until 17 and a half minutes in, other than a recreation of that Tonight Show interview from a year after this all happened. And so the whole first episode, and maybe this is how they're convincing themselves in their mind that they're doing okay by not having, you know, her approval or her consent or her involvement. But the whole first episode is about Rand, the guy that stole the tape. And it builds him up as this sympathetic person of like, well, yeah, fuck Tommy. I get why he would want to, you know, get some revenge on him. And then poor Pam is just like caught in the middle of this feud between these two guys, which is exactly what happened. But even really what the show is beside the point, because as you said, this is really the issue at hand here, is that they're making a movie that's supposed to be like, you know, really getting into what that experience was for them and how this completely turned a year of their lives upside down. Their marriage was already, from the beginning, like from the moment they got married, their marriage was already doomed. And this is supposed to be, you know, really getting into how this experience affected them. And it feels like it's really just about a salacious, you know, celebrity show. And this is, I guess for me, because we'll talk about some other projects and the differences when they get, you know, involvement from the people they're depicting and when they don't and stuff like that. But, you know, people always want to turn to, well, they have the right to do this. You know, this is news. Like you said, this is based on a Rolling Stone article that was published. And it's like, okay, yeah, sure, they have the right to make these projects because legally there are very few protections for people who are being depicted if they're public figures. But that doesn't make it, you know, a good thing to do. It doesn't make it, just because they have the legal right doesn't mean that it's morally right to do these kinds of projects. And so looking at what I did from the first episode, it's like, yeah, I can see why Pam would want to distance herself from this. And it really frustrates me that so many people are praising the show and saying like, oh, wow, this is so great. And completely ignoring the fact that this is exploiting probably one of the worst, most difficult times of her life.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of the reviews that I've read have gone into this question of, you know, what the show says about consent, right? And about the fact that, and you know, anyone who really knows anything about Pam Anderson, like she was the big star on Baywatch, she appeared in Playboy, she was kind of treated as she was a sex object, right? She was treated as a sex object.
Well, and she put herself out there. She built her career on that.
Yeah.
But that gave people this like false idea that they had some sort of ownership over her body because of it.
Well, and that's the thing. And I have seen a number of reviews that have talked about the fact, her choosing to pose in Playboy. That's her choice, right? That's something that she's allowed to do. She is allowed to use her body in that way. And she got paid for it, right? She got that was something that she had a degree of control over. And there's always, I think, this tension when you're actually talking about women who are primarily known for their sexuality. And at a much earlier level, if you talk about someone like Jane Russell or Marilyn Monroe, who were also treated as being these objects, right? These things that are there to be looked at. And the excuse is always, well, if they didn't want people to objectify them, then why did they do these movies? Why did Pam Anderson pose in Playboy, etc.? And it's like, well, there's a difference between having control of your own objectification and not, right? Mm-hmm. And that was the major difference, right? When the sex tape comes out, this is not something, like I said, this was not something that was made to be sold, right? This was something that was made for them personally. They put it in a safe in their house, right? So this was not something it's not like they were leaving it lying around,
right?
And it's just like, hey man, watch this, and then it was stolen from them, and it was used for profit, and the excuse very often was very much about Pam Anderson's persona. And it's like, well, that's what she is. She's this sex object, so that's what we're treating her as. And so there are a number of reviews that address that element, but the discomfort is, I absolutely agree, the discomfort is that the show itself is just another form of exploitation. Because if you're doing this without her consent, then you're essentially, like you say, dredging up this very painful moment in her past that she has become known for primarily, right? Mm-hmm. And making a show about it, even if you ultimately come down to, well, but we support her. And a number of the people involved, the showrunner, the writers, etc., have talked about the fact that, it's what's his name, Robert Siegel says, we're very much taking the side when you tell people about the show and about the tape. When I bring up the subject of the tape, I was shocked by how many people assumed that Anderson and Lee were in on it, which is something I'm happy we were able to set the record straight about. We very clearly, unambiguously present them as the victims of a crime, which they were. Okay, great. But you're now committing another act of violation against them.
Exactly. Why are you making this in the first place? Are you, like, if they're not asking you to set the record straight, why do you feel like you need to?
Well, and presumably Pam Anderson is not profiting from this.
At all, right.
Right. So, again, you have and it just boggles my mind that at no point, I mean, they must have thought about this, but there is just this sensation of like, you're profiting, right? Hulu, all of the showrunners, all of the writers, everybody involved, Lily James, Sebastian Stan, etc., are profiting from a story about a violation of consent without the consent of the person they're depicting. And exactly. And she's not profiting from it either. So it's kind of a repetition of this violation. Even though, and I think that then you get into the excuse, right, of, well, but we're doing, we support her. It's like, obviously you fucking don't. You might think that you're supporting her. You might say that, she's 100% behind this, or that she's being depicted in a way that is sympathetic. Right. But you're not supporting her because she never wanted this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. This is very different. As you mentioned, some of the people involved in this were involved in the American Crime Story anthology, which has the OJ case and Monica Lewinsky and the Johnny Versace murder.
Yeah, and
And
the Monica Lewinsky episode is produced by Monica Lewinsky.
right, well, that's what I was gonna say. And so you've got that, and then you've also got Craig Gillespie, who directed a couple of the episodes of Pam and Tommy, who directed I, Tonya, which was nominated for a couple of Oscars. And Tonya Harding was involved in the production of that. And one of the points I saw, I don't remember if it was in the Washington Post review or if it was in the EW article, but one of the points I saw was that, like, these women, not only were they involved in telling their story, they were ready to tell their story. They had processed it. They had, they had dealt with it very publicly and very privately. They'd gotten to a point where they felt comfortable talking about it, and then they did, and they were directly involved in the projects that were depicting their stories. So this is a very different situation, because in this case, we don't know if Pam has even, processed it. We don't know where she stands on it, because she doesn't talk about it, and she has every right not to talk about it. She doesn't owe us anything. And for her to then also not be involved in this, and for them to basically just, like, reach out and not even get an answer. That seems to be what happened. Like, she didn't even say, no, I don't want anything to do with it, or no, I don't want you to make it. Like, she just ignored them, and they just went, all right, cool, well, we're going to do it anyway.
Well, I have a feeling that if she had said no, they basically would have been like, oh, we're just going to do it anyways.
Yeah, we'll make some
right?
changes then,
Yeah.
or something, yeah.
And if she said yes, obviously she would have been giving them the attention that they wanted, to be giving them the permission that they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But if she had said yes, at least it would be like, okay, this is actually, you actually have the person that this is depicting saying, like, okay, yeah, sure, fine, go ahead. Like Tommy Lee, who's just like,
Right.
yeah, I don't care,
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it's interesting at the conclusion of the EW article that kind of breaks down this whole thing, and I'm interested at how intensely people are trying to justify the production of this show. but at the very end of it, it's basically like, they weren't worried about how Lee would feel about not being involved in the series. And Dee Vincentis, who is one of the showrunners or one of the writers, I think.
One of the writers, yeah.
Said Tommy is a public figure, and I think we treat him well enough, and we've come to know that he's excited about the show. But even that is a little distressing.
We've come to know.
Yeah.
So, like, how did you get that? Like, did he tell you that?
So obviously they reached out to Pam Anderson. They may not have even reached out to Tommy Lee and said, like, hey, we're making this show. Are you cool with that? And he does seem like the sort of person who would not care particularly, and has since said that he doesn't particularly care. But still, like, be like, hey, are you all right with the fact that we're making this show about this very personal part of your life that definitely had a severe impact on your marriage? It's just like, oh yeah, cool, dude, like, whatever. But you can't assume that someone is going to react like that.
Well, yeah, because yeah, exactly. It's such a, I'm not even sure how to say what I want to say, but especially because going back to what I had said before about, like, the right to tell these stories legally, like, it's such a fine line that people are walking, because clearly, I mean, I don't know what the Hulu viewership numbers are on this, but clearly there's an interest in this story, and a lot of average people that are just going to watch something, they don't know or care if the people involved, or if the people that are being depicted are involved in it at all. Like, that doesn't even register to them. They don't care. And there's a whole history of unauthorized biographies and unauthorized biopics where the people that are involved are like, no, this isn't the right story at all. We're not in favor of this. And they still get viewers because the average reader, the average watcher, they don't pay attention to what's going on behind the scenes. They're trusting that the people that are making these stories are just gonna, tell a good story and do a good job. And I don't know, it's just such a tricky situation. And I don't want to say, like, well, they should, No, actually, you know what? I am going to say it. They should not make these projects unless the people that they're about are on board with it. They don't have to be directly involved in the production, but they have to be okay with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I mean, I think that there's always there's always a difficulty, especially when you're talking about things that are particularly scandalous, right?
Yeah.
And when you're talking about certain celebrities, because you're kind of like, well, you want to present truth, right? You want to kind of get at the truth of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have to be concerned about not just the people who were involved in it, but also their, their desires and their families and things like that. And so, one of the ones that I always think about is the fact that Martin Scorsese for a long time was trying to make the Sinatra biopic.
Mm-hmm.
And finally gave up on it because he basically couldn't come to an agreement with the Sinatra family.
Yeah.
And I think that probably there were certain points of contention. There were certain ways that the Sinatra family wants Frank Sinatra to be remembered and to be portrayed. And so there's a little bit of conflict there where you're like, well, you want to deal with some of the less savory aspects, maybe, of someone like Frank Sinatra. But obviously the family, for the most part, is not going to want that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when it ultimately comes down to it, it's just like, do we need a Sinatra biopic? Not particularly. Do we need a television show about Pam Anderson and Tommy Lee? Not really. We don't. There are plenty of other things that we can talk about.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, so I was actually thinking a lot this week about, and this goes more into the quality when you have people involved and what parts of the stories they're willing to tell. Because the other thing is when you have the people that it's about, when you have them involved in the production, then it can go some very different and less honest ways too. For example, the difference between Bohemian Rhapsody and Rocketman.
Yeah.
Where Bohemian Rhapsody was done without the involvement of Freddie Mercury's family. And I'm sure Freddie Mercury wouldn't have been cool with the way that it was presented. But you have like Brian May and some of the others that were involved in that are like, no, we went home to our families every night. He was the one that was out partying and doing all the crazy shit. And so then you have this very untruthful biopic. Whereas with Rocketman, you have Elton John, who's very open about his past and very open about the fact that he was an asshole, and he is okay with letting that be depicted on screen. And so you have a much more truthful and also much more entertaining movie overall. But I think that's a big part of the difference, is that in that the main people that were depicted in that are Bernie and Elton, and they both were very involved in it, and not just giving permission, but they were like, yeah, here's the real truth of our story. Whereas Bohemian Rhapsody didn't have that because obviously Freddie is not here to tell his story.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, I think that was actually an example that I think of. It's like Rocketman. But yeah, I think that Rocketman definitely shows that you can make a biopic with the consent and the involvement of the people involved, and still go into some of those less savory aspects of who they were and who they are. And some of that is also about the comfort level of Elton John. Obviously, he is in a place where he was able to talk about that and was able to reveal those things about himself.
And if you can't get that kind of permission, even if they don't want to sit and like tell you their story, but if they're not willing to go along with the fact and sign off on the fact that you want to make this story, then the people that are doing these shows and movies need to step back and say, this comes back to what we were talking about. Like, Pam's not even, getting compensated for this show at all. And that's where you need to step back and say, like, okay, why do you need to tell this story then? If they're not comfortable with their actual story being told, why do you feel this need to tell it? Why do you feel like you have the right or the responsibility or the moral imperative or whatever it is to involve yourself in someone else's life?
Well, and there are plenty of television shows and films that take celebrity scandals and fictionalize them.
Yeah.
Right. And essentially take them and be like, okay, we're going to write a story that is based on this, but we're not actually going to do this. And that in some ways that's a workaround, because usually like what the story is based on, but at least that's not presenting this as an unassailable, like as a biopic, right? As a at some level a fact. And I think that that's one of the things that makes me uncomfortable about the Pam and Tommy thing generally, is this is what Pam, for a lot of people right now, this is going to be their primary memory of who Pam Anderson is. And it's definitely the most embarrassing and difficult part of her life, probably. And it's obviously not something that she has wanted to deal with publicly. And the fact is, we feel so strongly that we own celebrities, that we own their images, we own their, and not just we don't just own their images, because we do at some level, we do own their images. We own what Pam Anderson did on Baywatch, right? Every one of those episodes, that belongs to us. What doesn't belong to us is everything she did off screen.
Right.
And but we feel like we do own that. We feel like we do possess her at some level. And I think that that's true for pretty much every celebrity. We act like their lives belong to us. And that includes every problem they've ever had, every darkness in their past, everything good that they do. It all belongs to the public. And at a certain point, you begin to go like, well, this is a real violation of people who are complicated, who are assholes, who are kind people, who are like all kinds of different things, and we can't fit that into a cute little narrative.
Right. Well, and something you just said too, part of the problem with biopics is that and I enjoy well done ones. I mean, like I said, Rocketman, I love that movie. It's a great movie. I actually just watched it again recently. And it's still fantastic. But one of the issues that comes up when you have a biopic is that there's this assumption that everything you see is accurate, that this is the truth about this person's story, and that, you don't, sometimes people, will be interested enough to go and look up the real facts, but most of the time we just like, oh, well, we saw it in the movie, so that's really what happened. And that becomes a problem, because then the movies are rewriting history a lot of times. And this is something that we saw. I brought this up when we were, before we started recording, but I don't talk about this movie much because it's very unpopular to hate it, and I hate it. But that's The Social Network. And I do not support Mark Zuckerberg. He's a terrible person. I don't like him. I am not in any way looking at him as sympathetic or anything. But I think that looking at what happened with his story in The Social Network is important, because just because someone's an asshole doesn't make it okay to treat them the way that he was treated, the way he was depicted as not at all who he really is. Well, I mean, the asshole part they got right, but some of the other stuff was like very, very inaccurate. And but if you're gonna say, well, this person sucks, so I'm gonna do it, that gives you tacit permission to do that to anybody, no matter how awesome or terrible they are. And it really concerns me, and it really bothers me. And when people have very clearly said, I don't want a movie made about me, then I think that needs to be respected, which is something else that we were gonna talk about too. So
well, I think that this is a good thing to deal with, because it's that issue of the perfect victim. And this happens much more to women than to men, but as you're pointing out, it also happens to men. And this idea that so one of the things that a lot of reviews have pointed out in Pam and Tommy is that they're treating Pam Anderson as almost as proto-feminist, right? I don't know if Pam Anderson is a feminist or not. I have no idea. I don't know that much about her, but it shouldn't matter, right? She can be an absolute total bitch who is just like a nasty human being. She still does not deserve to have her consent violated.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things that we get into, particularly with some of these stories coming out of kind of the early to early internet era, right? In the 90s mostly. um, when various, where tabloids had a lot more power in a lot of ways because you didn't have the internet. And so there was this kind of weird understanding of what people owned and what people didn't about celebrities. But we're getting all these stories about people like Paris Hilton and Britney Spears and Pam Anderson. And there's this desire to basically turn them into good victims, right? They were actually misunderstood. It's just like, it doesn't fucking matter if Britney Spears was or was not misunderstood. It doesn't. What matters is that she has been imprisoned and violated.
Right.
Right. What matters is that Pam Anderson was violated by the release of her sex tape and is being violated by this show. Period. It doesn't matter what her perspectives are on anything else. That's just the reality of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention really quickly, because I just thought about this after we were talking about American Crime Story. I was like, another show that I have serious problems with is Feud. Particularly the Betty versus Joan whole thing. And one of the issues with Feud is that most of the people involved were dead by the time the show was being made. So there is very much this impression that, this was what happened. Not only that, Olivia de Havilland, who at the time was not dead,
right,
actually filed a lawsuit against the show for inaccurately portraying her and using her image without permission. Now, she eventually, at the end of the day, she eventually lost it. But it was this sensation of like, it was almost like, well, you thought you were going to get away with it kind of thing. You thought you were going to make a show about a time period where pretty much everyone involved has passed on. But you forgot about Olivia de Havilland.
Right. Well, and that comes back to what I was saying before, where it's like, okay, just because the law allows these kinds of things to happen, people just go, well, I can do it and it's fine. Like, legally, there's no financial responsibility or anything like that, which I think means maybe it's time to update some laws. But it comes back to, again, the morality of it. It's not just about whether it's legally permissible or not. Is this the right thing to do?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is where, we talked a couple weeks ago about ethics and ethical portrayals in films, but I think that there's a certain ethics to movie making as well. What are you choosing to portray? Do you have, and at the end of the day, it's about money, right? The producers of Pam and Tommy have obviously seen that they are going to be successful at this. And they have good reason to assume that because of the number of stories, particularly limited series, that are being released that are very similar to this, right? We said, mentioned Feud, all of the different series of American Crime Story. These are successful things, but at a certain level, and they're trashy. It's trash. Right? It's this kind of weird fascination with these kinds of scandals and murders and, sexual violations and things like that. And we love watching those kinds of stories because at some level we really do. It's tabloid, right? It's tabloid media. But because it's fictionalized, we can kind of step back from it and be like, well, I'm just enjoying the performances. I'm enjoying the fictionalization of it. But yeah, there has to be some kind of moral reckoning with, should you be, are you legally allowed to do this? Yes. Should we praise you for doing it? I don't think so.
You're so preoccupied with whether or not you could, you didn't stop to think if you should.
Exactly. Well, and this goes into, talking about Betty and Joan and Olivia de Havilland, this goes into the fairly recent announcement of the Fred Astaire biopic.
Yeah.
And Fred Astaire we know what Fred Astaire wanted. Fred Astaire was very vocal about not wanting to be portrayed on film. And they're still going ahead with it because obviously he does not have control over his image.
Right.
He's been dead for a long time. But again, it's this like, how can you claim that, you're going to be respectful? It could be the most respectful story ever. How can you claim that you're going to be respectful of him when he's literally said that he doesn't want this?
Yeah, when the existence of the project is already disrespecting his wishes.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that this is probably true. There are a number of celebrities that have had stories made about them. I know a lot of people have been like, oh, we should make a movie about Cary Grant. And Cary Grant himself, who was like asked to write his autobiography numerous times, and he said no, because that's how I'm going to be remembered, and I don't want to be remembered based upon what I write in my autobiography.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, so Madonna, there was going to be a biography or a biopic about her a couple years ago. I think it was Blonde Ambition. And she was very opposed to it. And ultimately that project fell apart. And she was like, if there's going to be a movie about me, I'm going to be involved in it. So she's, I think, directing it and co-writing it with Diablo Cody. So she's just like, fuck it, I'm going to tell my own story. And it's like, okay, great. Good for you. You do that. But for people to just decide that they're going to make a movie about someone just because they like them, like, it shouldn't work that way. You know, like, there needs to be, if you really respect, like, just what we were saying, if you really respect this person, then respect their wishes and respect their story.
Yes, definitely. Well, and the other day, I think you mentioned something on Slack about the fact that this is being made primarily by men.
Yeah.
Particularly the Pam and Tommy show. And so a lot of the people involved, not everybody, but a lot of the people involved are men. And there's this sense of that we've noted a number of times about the depictions, particularly of the violation of women, whether it's, releasing a sex tape, whether it's about rape, whether it's about, simply their private lives. There's this sense that right now, especially, there's almost a cottage industry of men making shows and films about the violation of women. And it feels like they kind of want to get points for being good feminists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of whether or not the women actually want them to make these shows.
Right. Exactly. Well, it's just like men speaking for women in general. It's like, I mean, we've talked about this a lot too, that multi-episode movie or whatever series about women directing movies directed by a man. And it's like, we just see that all the time of men. We recently had a Twitter kerfuffle about, a guy who wanted to direct a movie about women who love horror movies. And it's like, men want the points. Like, look at what a good little feminist I am. Look at how good of a job I'm doing supporting women by telling their stories for them. And it's like, how do you not see that you're missing the point?
Well, and they get really irate when you point it out.
Oh, so irate. Yeah.
Because they're not getting the cookies that they want, basically.
Yeah.
And usually then there are also a group of women who are like, no, he's great. We love him. We want him to do these things. It's just like, but do we? Because you might be comfortable with that, but I'm not comfortable with a man speaking for me, period.
Exactly. No matter who the man is, and no matter how much I like him.
I'm not comfortable with anyone speaking for me for that matter. But like whenever we get these stories about, oh, we're going to make this movie about like this event and we really are supporting this woman, it's just like, but you're not, because you're not giving her voice. You are speaking for her.
Exactly.
You're speaking for a group of women. You're speaking for a single woman. And you're saying, well, I know how it feels. It's just like, no, you don't. You don't know how this feels.
You cannot know how this feels.
And that's okay, right? That's not your fault, right? Because you're a cisgender man. It is not your fault if you do not know how a woman feels, but you can't impose your voice. And it does feel like some of these shows are exactly that. They're men imposing their voices. They're making certain that their voices continue to be the dominant ones, even though they don't completely realize that that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Anyways, any final thoughts on this one?
Watch something else instead.
There's a lot of good shows on right now. Like, I'm just finishing up Yellow Jackets.
Yeah, Yellow Jackets is great. The After Party is so much fun.
And that's on my list. I also want to watch, what's it called? Murderville.
Oh, yeah, I haven't watched that one yet.
Yeah,
Speaking of celebrities.
But see, that's like, that's so much that. Like, I don't need to watch Pam and Tommy. It's fine.
Exactly.
Plenty of things. Plenty of movies to watch. Well, the other thing that we wanted to talk about today is partially because I finally got to see this movie. Took a long time, but we did get a question from Mason Mumbles, and this was, I can't decide which Nightmare Alley to watch first. Any advice? So I have yes and no, because what I think is really bizarre about this is that going into Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley, I had seen the original 47 film 3 times. And I had just finished reading the book. And I definitely think that both of those experiences shaped my reaction to del Toro's Nightmare Alley. So I'm kind of like, well, you should watch both. I actually think you should probably watch the remake first. Because I think that it goes to places that the original doesn't, for good and ill. Like, I think that there are some things that I really like about it. There are other things that I had issues with. But I think that the 47 film is different enough in some way that I feel like the 47 film would reflect more on the remake than the remake does on the 47 film, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Because I was actually thinking the other way.
Well, there you go. We're not going to answer this question.
Because I felt like the 47 film lays kind of the foundation and gives some information that you don't get in the Del Toro one. But the Del Toro one also really expands on some things that I had questions about in the 47. So I don't know. For myself, I felt like it was, and honestly, I mean, we both watched the 47 film before we saw the new film. So it's like neither of us has the perspective of watching it the other way, so it's hard to know for sure, but yeah. Now, I have not read the book yet, which is supposed to arrive today, by the way.
Yay!
It's out for delivery. Anyway, but yeah, so I don't know. I felt like because the 47 film is so much shorter and cuts out so many more details, that it's more of a foundation film, if that makes sense.
I think that that's interesting. It's one of the things that I like that the 47 film does that I don't think gets emphasized enough in the remake is this issue of the tarot.
Yeah.
And the kind of using that, and actually, and some of this is definitely because I've read the book now, is actually something that the book does. The book uses the major arcana as kind of a guideline that runs throughout the entire story. Like each chapter is headed with a different tarot card.
Oh, okay.
And so there's this kind of reliance on that as in the progression of Stan's story. And I kind of understand why Del Toro didn't go in that direction. I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. But for me personally, I like the presence of the tarot. Mm-hmm. And this little hint of the supernatural that kind of runs throughout everything, because it's the story overall is about belief, and it's about lying, and it's about where those two intersect.
Yeah. Right.
And what is real and what isn't. And part of Stan's downfall is that he begins to mix together what is real and what isn't, what he's actually capable of and what he's not capable of. And the presence of the tarot, I think, helps to create more of that ambiguity in the viewer, in the sense that we have this feeling of fatalism. Mm-hmm. That runs throughout the film and the 47 film, even though I'm not a fan of the ending, and I think that the remake does the ending a lot better. Yeah. There's still that little hint of the supernatural, that little hint that there's something else going on underneath all of it, even though so much of it is about, Stan basically lying to people.
Yeah. Well, here's what I'll say, and maybe this can help you, Mason, to make up your mind on which order to do, since we did not give you a very solid answer. Well, we each gave a solid answer, but they were opposite answers. But I think, so the 47 film fills in a lot of information about the supporting characters around Stan. The Del Toro film fills in a lot of details about Stan specifically, and also like the antagonists, the two main antagonists to the story. But the stories themselves are basically the same. The details, it's like the structure of the story is the same, the plot is the same, but it just basically, I guess, whichever one you want to watch first is, going to be based on if you want to know more the backstory of the characters around Stan, or if you want to know more about Stan first.
Yeah, I think that's probably accurate.
The second another question from Connor Grote.
The second question, which leads into my major problem with Del Toro's film, is from Connor. Question concerning Nightmare Alley for Lauren. Did you really think Bradley Cooper was terrible? Yes, Connor, I did. I did. Well, let me provide a little bit more nuance to that. I didn't think he was terrible. Right. I don't think he's a bad actor. I think he's a very boring actor. On Twitter, I compared him to unsalted butter. And you know what? Unsalted butter can be useful. I use unsalted butter in baking all the time. It's usually not the main feature of baking. And that's part of the problem. When unsalted butter is the only thing that you're given, it becomes it's dull. It's not interesting. It should be used to enhance flavors, not to not be the main flavor. I guess that's what it comes down to. But so yeah, one of my biggest problem, honestly, with Del Toro's film was Bradley Cooper, and some of this again, and I think that a lot of this has caveats for me in my personal reaction because I had seen the 47 film, I'd read the book. Stan, I felt, really needed to be charismatic. And by charismatic, I mean, you've got to believe that other people would believe him, that he would be able to sell all of his lies, basically, and do it in a way that's really convincing. And I never bought that with Bradley Cooper. I felt like people believed him because the script required that they believe him, not because he was actually believable. And the other issue that I had with him is that dude's 47. And they kept on referring to him as kid throughout the first half of the movie. And I'm sitting there going he is visibly 2 years younger than you. 2 years younger, Zena. This is a grown-ass man. This is not a teenager. This is not, a 20-something. It's not even a 30-something. This is a guy who is 47 years old. And because of that, it felt like he was supposed to be naive in ways that in the initial kind of creation of his character, it felt like he was supposed to be naive. And I was just no, have you just been locked in that house for the past 47 years? You don't know anything about the world outside of it. Is that it? And
that's interesting because I got a very different thing from it. So that's funny.
Well, I mean, convince me otherwise. What else? What did you?
Well, I'm
feel
sure I
about
can't convince you because you also don't like Bradley Cooper.
Yes, that's the other caveat. This really was an uphill battle for me. I was willing for him to convince me, but it's definitely more of a challenge.
Yeah, and that's the thing is for me, I do like Bradley Cooper. I always have. It's funny because it sounds so weird, but sometimes I forget that I like him. Because I hated his A Star Is Born and all the press that came around that and all the praise that he was getting and still continues to get. Oh my gosh, I swear if I see one more tweet about how he really should have won Best Actor that year, I'm gonna scream. But I just, so because of that movie, occasionally I forget that I like him, but every time I see him and stuff, I'm oh wait, yeah, I like you. You are cute. And I personally, I did believe him as being someone who could charm an audience into just believing what he was saying, in the way that Stan does. I do agree that he, the whole calling him kid thing was weird. And I actually think that it would have probably been better if they'd cast someone younger. in that role. But as far as the him supposed to be naive, I didn't get that part at all. I didn't think that, like, I and maybe this is just me reading into things that aren't there, assuming facts not in evidence, but for me it was like, anyway, goes back to his childhood home, does what he does, goes back out on the road, and is just kind of wandering because he's never really had any direction in his life, never really had anywhere to go, and just kind of is wandering aimlessly, finds the carnival, and that's something that, like, he kind of just finds the community he's never had. That was how I took it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I just found his, it was interesting because I realized he doesn't really have a line.
He doesn't, yeah, not a single
good,
line until, yeah.
For a good portion of that opening. Like, it's him on the screen most of the time, but he doesn't actually say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And and maybe that's the other thing that kind of bothered me about it a little bit, is that people would keep on being like, oh, you've got real moxie, kid. Yeah, you're gonna do great here. It's just like, he's literally
based on what? Yeah.
Based on what? He is standing there. He looks like he's just standing.
It's those
there.
Piercing blue eyes, Lauren. That's enough.
You can't see the piercing blue eyes in that, and like all of the rain and everything. It's just like, he's literally just standing there. Why? These carnival people who are supposed to be really savvy and everything, it's just like, you're gonna make a real big hit. It's just like, no, he's not. He's not, because he's a 47-year-old man.
Yeah, no, I liked him, and I thought that in the later stuff he was very good, and the stuff with him and Cate Blanchett I was all into. But I agree that it would have been even a better film if they had gone with someone younger.
Yeah, definitely. I did love Cate Blanchett. I think that, and I like that, asking about, should I see the 47 film, should I see the remake first? It's interesting because the character is so similar and yet so different. Yeah. And what motivates her and her behavior and the way that she relates to him is so different. And I liked that because I felt like I wasn't sitting there the entire time comparing them. Yeah. It was more like, oh, you're doing something completely different. I'm down with that. Like, that's fine. And I really did enjoy that. And yeah, there is a scene where I was just like, oh, this is what I came for. This is why I'm here. Like, this is exactly what I've been waiting to see.
Oh yeah.
And there's especially one particular line that she says, and I'm not going to say it because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I was just like, yay! Thank you so much for doing this for me personally.
Yep. Yeah, this was, I've always admired Cate Blanchett, but this is the movie where I realized it's more than admiration.
She's something. I think you mentioned not that long ago that she really is timeless. Yeah. And it feels like this is her role, that role was written specifically for her, even though the original film role was written in 47 and the original book is like 46. Yeah. I mean, I think it was even 41. And so it's like the book was written 70 years before, like 70 years ago. And yeah. Yes, well, like we said, she is a vampire. It's the only explanation. And she's great. Yeah. So I do recommend both films. At the end of the day, I think the 47 film is great. I like it on balance a little bit more, I think, and some of that is because of Tyrone Power. Mm-hmm. But I also really enjoyed the Del Toro film. I think that there's a lot of good things in it, and the aesthetic is gorgeous. I would love to see it. I would love to see the black and white version. Even though I think the color works great as well, but I think it would be really interesting to see the contrast. Mm-hmm. And so I recommend both of them at the end of the day.
Yay! I'm just glad that you weren't hugely disappointed with the Del Toro film, and I really didn't think you would be, but I know how you feel about Bradley Cooper, and that is definitely an obstacle to overcome. It's like, like there are certain actors I can't stand, and if they're in a movie, I'm probably not going to like it. Jesse Eisenberg. But anyway, yeah.
Well, again, I don't dislike Bradley Cooper. I just am very unimpressed by him.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
I dislike Leonardo DiCaprio.
Also fair.
Well, I think that that is going to close us out.
Yeah.
We had some fun conversations, and to let everybody know, we are doing all kinds of updates and things like that on our website, on our Zazzle store. Karen is all into that. So
And
is
not
there...
just planning updates, they're actually in the works. We have some new stuff that will be hitting the Zazzle store by the time you hear this episode.
Yeah, so
It's
definitely
already
go,
submitted.
definitely go check out our Zazzle store. It's zazzle.com/citizendamepod. And of course, we want to thank our patrons, who include Adriana, Ali, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Kathleen, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, Tao, and Will. Thank you so much for continuing to support us. And by the way, guys, we are like in the process of getting like actual things out to you, which you deserve. So
We have stuff on order, for real.
we do actually. So be on the lookout for that. We are slow, but we're getting there.
2022 is our year, man. It's happening.
And if you want to join our Patreon, that's patreon.com/citizendame. You get bonus episodes. You will be getting some fun like welcome gift stuff. And we're going to try to do some more watch parties and things like that. So a lot of stuff is coming down the line, and we are actually making plans and doing things finally. You can also
if you're on, sorry, I'm just going to jump in again. I keep doing that. I apologize. But if you are a Patreon subscriber, make sure you go in and add a mailing address in there, because like Lauren just said, we are going to be mailing some stuff out to you, and we need an address. So
yes. So we also have a Ko-Fi account, ko-fi.com/citizendame, if you want to throw us a few dollars without joining a Patreon. But really, please, if you would like to join the Patreon, that would be great, because it's very helpful. We have our website, citizendamepod.com, where we have reviews and Blu-ray stuff, and we are going to be getting more things up. I've got a few essays that I've been working on that I really want to finish and get up there. So keep an eye out for that. You can also get in touch with us. Our email is citizendamepod@gmail.com, and you can get in touch with us via Twitter and Instagram. That's @citizendamepod. We are also on Letterboxd @citizendame. So go and check all those various things out. And if you want to get in touch with us individually, we are there as well. I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @LHBusiness. Karen, where are you?
I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd @Karen M. Peterson.
And that will close us out for this week. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye.
Did you knock this off the table?
No, you must have dropped it yourself.
Don't see how I could. Was it face up or down?
Face down.
Are you sure?
Yeah, why?
Couldn't be like that. It's too awful. It's too crazy.
What's got into you?
Get your bath and get out of here.
What's the matter?
It's all off, Stan.
The act?
Everything.
But what have I done?
Nothing, but I can't go against the cards.
You don't believe in that junk.
I didn't used to, but time after time they told me I was going to ruin Pete's life, and I went right ahead. Here's Pete's card.
Well, what are you worrying about? Is this the one that was on the floor?
No, this one. You see what it means? Are you satisfied?
Zena, it just doesn't make sense.
Maybe not. Maybe it's silly, maybe it isn't.
Listen, honey. We've all got to die sometime.
Sure, but when a card falls on the floor, whatever happens, good or bad, is going to happen fast. And when a card falls face down, it's bad.
Oh, Zena, that's for the chumps.
It's been true of Pete and me so far, hasn't it?
Honest, Zena, to see a smart girl like you fall for one of your own boob catchers, I give up. Yes, sir, I give up.
I don't believe it.
Huh?
You never give up.